just a bloke in a bar.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another episode of Bloke in a Bar, brought to you by the best beer in all the land. Matter of fact, the beer is so good, it is currently on special in every celebrations in New South Wales and Queensland. You can get it for as low as $53 a case in every celebrations, New South Wales and Queensland. If it isn't there, just ask politely. They're probably sold out. To stock some more, Bloke, and they'll get more in. Also, this Friday, we'll be at Rockhampton at 6 p.m. at the Greater Western Hotel. The Great Western Hotel. Cannot wait. Rock Vegas had many a night there. I've had many a night as a reserve grade player. Matter of fact, I might not be allowed in a few of the locals. No, Rock Vegas, absolutely love visiting there when I was a player, so cannot wait to get up there. That's 6 p.m. at the Great Western. Live show. Myself, Guru, Timmy and Maddie will be there. Come down for a beer, enjoy the live show, and then we obviously can have a beer together. But with that all out of the way, I've got journalists. Do you like to be known as a journalist, Andrew?
Sports writer?
Sports writer. I got sports writer Andrew Webster, and I thought, how good would it be get me good mate Webby on to get the other side of the coin, the other side of the coin of rugby league. Mate, first of all, how you been?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Mate.
You must be scraping the bottom of the barrel if you're getting me.
No way, mate.
I was just saying before we came on air, I've got two nephews, knockabout tradies, early 20s. They don't give a shit what I do for my career. They don't give a shit, whether you're on Nine, The Herald, SEN. But now I'm going to be on your podcast. I think they'll be beside themselves. I'll get some love, some cool status. Although they seem to like me when I get them tickets to Origins.
That seems to help a little bit.
Sign jumpers. They seem to like that. But no, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really like this podcast. I always listen to it because there's always little nuggets.
Mate,
the players always open up to you a lot more, and and the thing is with journalism these days, you don't get that access with players like you used to.
Because I assume back in the day it would have been way more open. Like you'd almost have a beer with the players.
Well, you did. Well, when I started in Newcastle in the 90s, that's how I know the Johns boys so well. So that was 90. This is my 27th season of the NRL. So 96. Yeah, I know.
Veteran.
Jesus.
27 years.
I know.
You would have seen it all.
I've seen a lot.
Yeah.
I'm starting to feel it. This is what a life of journalism, of rugby league journalism will do to your head, your body and your hair. But after the game, at Marathon, as it was back then, you used to go and have a beer with the players.
Yeah.
Sit down, beer. They used to be big eskies full of Tui's new cans on ice, and you grab one and sit there with your pad and your phone and sit next to Joey or Maddie and chat away, and none of that anymore.
That's great. It's such an interesting, I guess, dynamic, because the thing is like a lot of people like to just blame, the media for the relationship breakdown or whatever. And I think it's a two-way street, because, like, for example, when I was coming through, you're almost taught to mistrust the media. Like, you're getting told by the club, don't speak to the journalists, don't say this, don't say that. And look, I understand it. They're a business. They're trying to protect their... Everyone is coming from a perspective that you could understand if you heard them say it. But I guess from your perspective, first of all, what's it like to be a journo in rugby league? Did you used to be more respected, and as you get lumped in with everyone else, what's it like?
I think, look, the reason why I just, as a kid, I was not particularly good at sport at all, but I always loved it. And I always loved league, and always obsessed with sport, but always obsessed with St. George. Always a St. George supporter, always obsessed around Origin. And I always loved to write. So, I come from a family of bricklayers, and I just never wanted to... My dad drilled into me, mate, go and get an education and do something you love. So I combined the two things. I love sport and writing together. So that's why I went down that path. It's certainly changed. I was talking about this to someone the other day. Like, I started in the Hunter Valley. I had probably more fun covering sport then, because you could just mix with the players, and you go and catch up with them afterwards, and there was no distrust there. And if you pissed them off, there'd be a frank conversation, and that was the end of it. And I've just seen, and that was always the case in the NRL as well. And I think Super League changed a lot of things. I think there was more of an emphasis on gossipy news. Yeah. The Sunday papers started up their gossip columns, and things sort of went from there, where the rugby league's changed as much as journalism has in the last 25 years. I hate the current sort of influence of clickbait. I hate that.
Yeah.
I think journos are judged on their clicks, their page views. And usually that's determined by the headline. The headline doesn't match the story. And I think as a consequence, journos have gotten lazy. And I also think readers have gotten lazy too, where they just, they look at a headline and make an opinion on the piece that you've written. Now, I like to, if I'm a columnist these days, I'm not so much I don't usually write news stories, but I'll ring 15 people, say, before I write a column. And then I'll put a lot of time and effort into it and craft it out. And you get quite frustrated and disillusioned when people are going to judge that piece because they've seen the headline, they've read the first paragraph, you're a grub, you're a prick, you don't know what you're talking about, when they haven't really read the story anyway.
Yeah.
So that's a two-way street. You know?
Yeah,
I think because journalism's been cheapened so much, that's the response you get.
Yeah. So walk us through the process of a story, because I think a lot of listeners may not know that, like, for example, you don't write the headlines, you've got someone else. So what's the full process? Like, let's say there's a big name about to sign somewhere. Actually, and if you could, like, any name that you could use that has happened recently that you can speak about, obviously.
Okay.
What would be the process, like, of putting a story together? Because a lot of, like, for example, let's say a player is linked to a club and then he signs with somewhere else. A lot of people go, oh, lying journalist kind of thing. So what's the process of something like that?
The thing is in footy is people fucking lie. If I told you how many times I've been completely lied to by people who I've, people that I've trusted for decades, people I've, whose family's barbecues I've been to.
Yeah, wow.
They'll tell you one thing and then, it might take a day, it could take a week, it could take a year, and you'll realise you've been completely had.
And you're almost being used for their agenda.
Exactly. So unless but it also comes down to if you don't know 100% that it's right, you have to write it that way.
Yeah.
And I think because there's so much, particularly in rugby league, journos all competing for the story or the clicks, that they'll put so many revs on the story to make it right. But like, I'll give you an example, and sometimes you get it wrong. You've got to be big enough to say you got it wrong.
Yeah.
I'll give you a great example of it because I'm writing a book at the moment on Wayne Bennett.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of Bennett's in my wheelhouse. So I remember when he left the Knights in 2014, there was all this talk about where he was going to go. Was he going to go back to Brisbane? Was he going to go back to the Dragons? There was other clubs sniffing around. And I got told on the Thursday that he was all but done at the Dragons. So I wrote that column on the Friday. Wayne Bennett all but done at the Dragons, best thing the club has done since he left, etc., etc., etc. And that came from someone on the board. 2 days later, he signs with the Broncos. And I got hammered. I remember readers just like absolutely carving it off. Even though I didn't declare it, I said it was all but done.
Yeah.
So, and I went back to my guy and I said, what happened there? And they said, he reneged.
Yeah, wow.
He turned around at the last minute and reneged. And in the course of writing this book, and I don't think I'm giving up too much, but like, and Bennett said this to me, so he was on his way down the F3 from Newcastle to Cogra to sign the contract at the Leagues Club. He got a phone call from a Broncos player and said, we're in trouble, can you sort us out? And that's when he called Lachlan Murdoch, and then within 12 hours, he was done and dusted at the Broncos.
No way. So
St. George had a press release ready to go that Saturday to put out. But so it looks like I've got it terribly wrong, where it was like I was actually right, it's just changed. Yeah. But no one sort of understands that.
Give you that
Things
nuance.
change too. That's the other thing too. Things change so dramatically that, it's you fumble around the dark a lot as a journo, but you just got to be... You've got to be careful, particularly in league, who your sources are and who's telling you stuff. Yeah. And always give yourself an out, because like that example there. Yeah. It was funny, like I remember at the time and I was like, Jesus, like I felt so crook about it. Yeah. And when I was researching this Bennett book and I went, there you go, I was actually right.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, he actually changed his mind.
So he was on the freeway down.
He was on the freeway on the way down on the Saturday to sign the contract.
And the Broncos called him.
as a Broncos player called him and said, "We're in trouble here at the moment. Things aren't going great. We need you to come back."
A Broncos player called him.
Player called him.
Holy.
Who is it? Make sure you buy the book at the end of the year.
So when's it coming out, the book?
October.
Middle
of October.
And
it depends, though. If the Dolphins...
yeah, you want to extend it then. If they go well,
this is the thing, though. So we were sort of working on the assumption that the Dolphins weren't going to make the 8.
Yeah.
After Sunday...
They look all right.
They looked all right.
Yeah.
They looked all right. And didn't he looked like the cat that got the cream too,
Oh,
didn't he?
my God.
What about him in that
smirk when he went in the press conference?
Press conference? It's hilarious.
So who was? Oh, I won't say who the journo was. But he's like, did you come up?
It was a News Limited journo.
He was like, did you come up?
Oh no, I think that was to James Hooper.
Oh really?
I think that was Hoops' voice I could hear.
Okay,
but I think when
he
had a crack at the other journo, there was a News Limited journo for saying, but this is a great example. Okay, this is where coaches, players, whoever, they have every right to get fucked off with this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So remember the story the other week about him not being at the last trial.
Yeah.
And it was completely plausible why, because he was going to be there the next day and the training was going to start early, but no one had called him and checked about what had happened.
Yeah.
And that's fair enough.
100%.
If you're going to run that story and have a crack, and you're going to have a crack at him and say how unprofessional he is, at least go to him for a response.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big thing too, mate. It's like a lot of journos won't check for check details.
Yeah.
The other week there, I actually did a story on Bennett and about how he told me how Brandon Smith had agreed to $900,000 a year to come and shook hands, and then I just got to go and see the Roosters out of respect. Ended up reneging and staying or going to the Roosters.
Wow.
And I texted Brandon and said, "Look, mate, Bennett said this. I'm going to run it." And he called me and he said, "Oh, mate, thanks for calling me." I thought he was going to deny it all. He said, "Oh, thanks for calling me."
Yeah.
I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Oh, normally that doesn't happen. They just run it."
Yeah.
So I couldn't. And sometimes you'd make that mistake. You're so certain in something and run it.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, I think you got to. There's sort of the basics of journalism that people don't do anymore.
Yeah, it's and so what's the process of a story coming together? Like, so you will call, like, for example, when you go hearing whispers, X players go on X club, you'll call player managers.
Player managers, clubs. See, I'm lucky. I don't really write those stories as much anymore.
Yeah, okay.
But thank God, because I think the player manager has used up the media so much in recent years.
Yeah.
Like, it's shameless.
Yeah.
like you can almost set your clock to some of these stories.
Oh, for sure.
Really, yeah.
And you know what, like, for example, like, I think a really good one, or just use, and I'm not saying that the player manager is doing this, but like, for example, these huge figures that the Tigers are paying Moses 1.4 and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's a reason it's like putting pressure on certain people to get things done.
Yeah.
I mean,
and inflate a price.
Clubs,
but it's such an old trick.
Yeah, it's an old.
They were doing it 20 years ago. I remember those type of stories that long ago. But still, managers want to get lines out there, and journos want to get their name in the paper.
Yeah.
So
and clubs do it too.
But I also empathise with younger journos. Like, I'd hate to be coming through now. Like, the pressure to try and get, as I said, clicks and subscriptions, and I know it, like at the Telegraph, like, they know which stories has actually got a subscription to their.
Yeah, wow.
So if you're driven by that, that's dangerous.
Yeah,
I think that's dangerous.
Yeah. It's the whole business model with journalism is a really tough one, because you need revenue, but you shouldn't be influenced. Like, a journalist's obviously job is to get the truth as much close to the truth as possible.
Yeah.
But when you're motivated by sensationalism, you can't really.
Yeah,
they don't mesh.
Yeah, and it's in league. Like, I remember, like, as I said, back in the day, in the 90s, there'd be 4 of you covering the game, and now there'd be 40.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's particularly around Origin. That's when I noticed it the most. Like, it's a. I remember when Latrell signed with South. I remember I went to that press conference. I've been around a bit. I couldn't get a question in.
Yeah,
Every time I tried to say something, and I remember looking at Latrell, and he just goes, "Get me after."
Yeah. It's like the thing with journalism. Like, I'm totally cool with speculation, with opinion pieces, and all that kind of stuff. The only thing that I really dislike is like when players are painted in a bad light with false information.
Yeah.
Like, such and such player, is being greedy because he wants X amount of dollars when that's not true.
The thing that's going on with Mitchell and Moses at the moment is terrible. Yeah, he got questioned about it yesterday about, are you greedy? Are you putting too much pressure on Brad Arthur because you haven't made a decision? He's got to answer questions about it. I mean, seriously,
it's crazy. If
Brad Arthur can't handle questions about Mitchell Moses' contract, it's not the worst. Not the worst question to be asked.
Oh, I mean,
it's such a nothing sort of storyline.
Yeah, and making Mitch look like he's being greedy when we don't really know the figure.
I could see him in that press conference the other day you could see how shitty he was getting.
Yeah.
He had a smile on his face to a point, and that's where I feel sorry for. The other thing I hate too, I hate when clubs, say there's a big drama, particularly big off-field drama, and I mean a serious one with police charges, and no one from the club will front. Except for I know, but it's this player's turn to do media today. So he's got to sit there and answer and bat away, tough questions about his teammate who's in court. I mean, that's shit.
You're better off just putting a front foot. This is a statement. Get a professional that knows how to answer these questions without, doing anything.
There's the other thing too, blokes like Bennett and a Gus or whoever, they'll just manipulate. They'll manipulate them. They're the best I've ever seen. Best.
I mean, everyone is guilty. Even players are guilty of being sensitive. It's not like they're just these perfect human beings that don't do anything wrong. Plenty of players have had a sook when they should be like, mate, it's a journo's opinion. You think, you play well. You can't be upping for that.
But then I reckon a big problem is, at least not being able to have access to the players, particularly after games, or just to have a relationship with them. That's where I reckon the distrust comes from. For sure.
Because if you got to know each other and you knew, if you build that rapport of mate, I'm not going to write something you don't want me to write. Because most journos won't. But my experience,
no, of course not.
There's been plenty of times when I was playing footy where I'd just say, could you just tweak this little bit here or this bit or whatever? And they were, sweet, man. It's like anything. There's a few bad apples in rugby league when it comes to the players. There's a few bad apples it's like anything.
Yeah. I also think players don't get what journos do. They think there's a lot of the time there's a bit of paranoia there. I understand why. I remember I was on a Four Nations tour, this is years ago, and I was having a beer before one of the games, a few days before one of the games, and Dave Shillington was in the team, and he wasn't playing that test, and we were having a beer at the bar, and I had talked to Dave before. He's a really nice guy, and I started to go, so how do you get on with those journos in Brisbane? He goes, I can't handle Steve Ricketts. I said, Steve Ricketts, he's one of the nicest men in the world. I said, why? He said, because of the score he gave me out of 10 in the player ratings for an Origin. And I said, what did he give you? He said 4. And I said, that's pretty low. I said, what'd you do? He goes, I was only on for 10 minutes. I went, that's why you got the 4, because you weren't on long enough. Yeah. So he held this grudge against poor old Steve Ricketts for a player rating that journos do, having watched half the game because you're filing right on deadline. I was like, mate, you got to let that go.
Yeah, you got to let that one go for sure.
Yeah.
So take us back to just in regards to putting the story together. So you put the story together. And then
a lot of times if you're younger than the sports editor will go, mate, I think this is story. Mitchell Moses, we've got to keep on top of that. What's going on? The journo should ring the player manager. He should ring the club, prospective clubs. Try to talk to Mitchell. Try and talk to his teammates. Try and get a read on what's going on. But the thing is, if it's not there, then don't write anything. Yeah,
and so
don't call him greedy.
Yeah, I mean that's when you don't even know the figure. And so you'll write the story. You'll take it to your editor.
Yeah, you write it, file it, and they'll judge whether it should go in the paper, where it should go in the paper, when it should go online. Yeah,
and then they write the headline too.
Yeah.
So journos don't usually write the headlines.
They do. It's some systems they do, but it still goes through a sub editor and an editor. So if it doesn't reflect the story, then they'll change it.
Okay.
Yeah. Then or if the story's too litigious, they'll send it to a lawyer, and then they'll go through it, and you have all those arguments and debates. And
So take us back to a young fella coming into journalism, wide-eyed, the world. You're going to be the next bloody, I don't know, some famous journo.
Ray Chesterton.
Yeah, some war
some old Peter Frolingo.
Yeah.
I started in the Hunter Valley for a small regional paper, but always covering the Knights and local footy. And then I moved around the country for a while, and then I sort of got my big break in the year 2000 when I came to Sydney to work for Inside Sport magazine. I was a staff writer there for 3-4 years.
Who was your first big story where you're like, wow, that's such and such?
I did a big, oh God. I was always a bit starstruck at like those, like in the mid-90s, like the Johns boys were.
Oh, they were kings.
They were kings.
Especially in that area.
Yeah, in that area and also just...
Like, fuck Matty now, though.
Fucking dud.
He's a dud.
You know
so
what,
overrated.
They're both a great example of like what happens to your ego when fame just consumes you, and that's all they're driven by.
So overrated.
They're not the same knockabout blokes that I sort of started covering in the 90s. You know, when I see Matty at a poker machine or Andrew at a tab, you know, I just think you've changed.
Yeah, changed heaps.
They haven't changed at all. I don't reckon they have. Joey, so I'd sort of just started, and then the Knights won the comp in '97. Yeah,
what a time to be around.
Yeah, it was a really good thing to start. Yeah. And I remember like that city just went for 3 weeks basically. But I remember at the civic reception, like in the lead up to the game, their access was sensational. But there was so much hype around it, and again, you could do whatever you wanted. Like I remember going to interview the Johns family at their place in Cessnock, and like the access you could get then was ridiculous. But after they won it, they were at the civic reception on the Tuesday, and they had this function on top of remember the famous photo where they're all on the top of the council chambers overlooking the park, and there's hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of people. And Joey, let's just say, how can I describe this without defaming him, was in a jolly mood. He's quite jolly, and he was doing these ones, the devil's horns. Yeah. He was doing that like in the presentation after the game, but he kept doing that. So they're all there, waiting for this civic reception to start. And I went up to him and said, "Joey, Andrew Webster." He goes, "Just make the quotes up. Just make them up." That's how good it's going.
That's trust.
And I've been making up his quotes ever since.
I mean, the impact that they have had on rugby league is probably the most impact of any brothers ever.
They are. They have. And they're just such good knockabout guys. You know, they've never been. Joey was. I saw it like his level of fame as it grew from say the mid '90s through to, you know, a decade later. Just he was consumed by people just wanting a piece of him. Yeah, like everyone knew his home number. Wow. Everyone knew where he lived at Dixon Park there in Newcastle. You know, people come up and knock on his front door. Like it was driving him mad. Yeah. And I think that's why he almost went to rugby. I actually spoke to him about this the other week. Like he'd had enough of Newcastle. Yeah. Like Newcastle's such a strong, like it's everyone talks about all the different heartlands of rugby league. Like I think people underestimate just how, you know, just how passionate people are about footy there.
Well, it's like Queensland. Yeah. And I know as a New South Welshman you don't want to hear it, but it really is like Queensland. Like Brisbane love rugby league.
I mean, the first game of footy I ever covered was a local game between Cessnock and Curry at Curry Sports Ground. And I remember covering that. I walked in at 3rd grade, and there was when I saw everyone was on the cans of Jim Beam and Coke at the start of 3rd grade. I went, "Well, this is going to be an interesting day," and it was. That was the day. There was I love local footy. Yeah. Some of the shit you see. I remember there was this kid sitting on the fence, giving it. Steve Linnane was playing. The great Steve Linnane, who used to play for St George, was playing for Curry, and he was into Linnane all day. Particularly about the marijuana. That's what got him kicked out of the Dragons all those years ago, and that was publicised. So I don't think we're defaming Steve Linnane. Anyway, Linnane had copped it from this kid all day on the fence, and Curry got a penalty right near the sideline. And Steve Linnane's kicked for touch, and it's hit this kid right in the head. You don't see that. You don't see that too often. But at the end of that game, there's a really controversial decision, and the crowd chased the referee up the tunnel.
No way.
Yeah. And I was covering the game with Barry Toohey, who used to work at the Telegraph, and he was covering it. I'll never forget, Barry Toohey raced up behind the referee, and as he was trying to close the referee's door, he put his foot in the door and said, "Why did you send him off? Why did you send the player off that caused the near riot at Curry Sports Ground?" That was the first game of footy I ever covered.
Really?
Yeah.
And you're going, these Neanderthals.
The second game I covered was a South Newcastle game against Waratah, and the coach said at halftime, he said, "If you beat these fuckers, I'll buy a keg of beer."
Mate, it's just a different time, eh?
Yeah. I think that's what they need in footy, in the NRL level.
Mate, seriously.
Maybe that's what Bennett did for the Dolphins. Maybe offered a keg.
Yeah, you know what? It was well, actually, they're sponsored by Forex, so I can't say Bloke, but in an alternative universe, it was by Bloke.
Forex. that cat's piss.
Hey, I won't hear bad words about Forex. So we may be a new beer coming up, but that's
a collaboration.
No, but that's a Queensland spirit kind of thing.
You should collaborate with them.
Yeah, I mean, if they want, for sure, reach out.
If they can afford you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so what was your first big, I guess, interview where you're like, almost like we're sitting there going, this is why I do journalism. Like, this is what I got into it for, this huge spread on X player about something.
I did a piece for Inside Sport on Justin Langer when he was playing. That was the first time I'd actually been sent over somewhere to Perth, and back then I'd spent the whole week there. And going into his backyard and his, and just going and interview everyone that was possible for that story, just that sort of level of detail. I thought, Jesus, this is pretty fun.
Yeah,
this is pretty fun.
Meet people like wait in parking lots to meet these kind of people.
Yeah, and just to hang out. And so Inside Sport was great because I learned how to write. I had some pretty good parties.
Yeah, I can imagine.
The Inside Sport parties. Part of that job was to interview the models.
No way.
Remember the cover models of Inside Sport? You'd be too young.
Yeah.
You don't remember early 2000s?
I was playing soccer, so wasn't really.
So Inside Sport was like, it was like a monthly glossy magazine, and it was made on the same level as Penthouse.
No way.
Yes, it was.
Holy. So did you see a lot of Penthouse models coming in?
Oh, we shared the lift.
No way.
Yeah. I went to a lot of photo shoots. They were always.
No way.
For the Inside Sport, not Penthouse.
Okay, but they were the same models though, weren't they?
No, different models.
Okay.
Penthouse, there's the naked models and the bikini models.
Oh, okay.
We always
I thought you could do both.
Well, you probably
cross code.
Yeah, look, I'd be dual international.
Yeah, dual international. Man, Inside Sport. So,
because they were pretty crazy days.
Yeah, I can imagine. No camera phones either.
No.
So
I'm just actually trying to think of a story that I can tell that's not going to
ruin someone's life.
Yeah, or my own. We don't want to incriminate myself.
It's basically you're working for Inside Sports, and then what was the kind of next progression in your career?
And then I went to work for the Sun Herald in late 2005. So I went from monthly magazines to Sunday tabloid. Danny Wyler had just gone to Channel 9, so I started doing that sort of inside back gossip column. And that was when I started bluing Deluxe with Buzz.
No way.
Yeah, Buzz was running the other column. And so Buzz would just rip me to shreds.
Really?
Every Sunday.
Are you good now or not good now?
We're fine. We're great.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we were really, he got really personal. Yep. My old girl was going to come down to Sydney and try and knock him out. She was filthy.
And is he just really competitive?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because Buzz is a throwback to those really old days. Those old days in the 70s and 80s where the papers would go at each other really hard. And there was the old afternoon papers. So papers like The Sun and The Mirror, they'd come out in the afternoon, and they were old blood and guts days of journalism where they just try to outdo each other every day. It was so competitive. And then
they saw a young fella and someone to rough him up a bit.
Exactly. That's how it was. And I remember at the Dally M's at the end of that year, I always thought it was all taking the piss. I didn't think it was that serious. I went to the Dally M's and we got full of drink and I saw Buzz and I went over to Buzz to shake his hand. And Buzz put his beer down and was going to throw one.
No way.
Oh, 100%.
Buzz the Mayo Man was ready to throw.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I went over and introduced myself to Kenty, and he was ready to do the same thing.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
No, that doesn't matter.
Not one bit.
I said, why don't you and Buzz fight each other?
Yeah, they should just get it on.
But now I get on great with them. So then a couple of years later, they tried to employ me.
So you earned your stripes with them to a degree?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I did, because I wasn't going to put up with their bullshit to a lot of it.
Yeah.
So
were they like... a lot of their opinions I disagree with, and also sometimes the way they do things. But I'm a player, so I guess I'm an ex-player. But I have been told, and I don't even know, but I've been told that like both Buzz and Kenty used to be extremely good journos.
Yeah.
Like, as in genuinely, you know, they may have look. Maybe they were saying the same back then.
Kenty's a beautiful rider.
Yeah, okay.
Kenty's one of the most elegant riders I've seen. And Buzz is the best news hound I've ever seen. Like Buzz's contact, when you've been around for as long as they have in particular, like their contacts are so strong, you know.
Straight to the top, pretty much.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Buzz has broken some of the biggest yarns that's ever happened.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. And so back in the day, what was Kenty like as a young fella? The same?
Yeah.
Just loved a beer, loved the blue, and loved to talk shit.
Yeah. Yeah,
hell,
yeah, but he's always been a pretty special rider.
Yeah, okay. So what was he like as a journo back in the day before, you know?
I only really knew him around that 2005 period. So,
yeah, okay.
But they were, as I said, they're just all really well connected.
Yeah.
They used to break a lot of stories, and they used to have a lot of. Again, they used to have so much better access than what they do now. But yeah, I think they're controversial.
Oh yeah, they're controversial.
The worst thing I reckon that ever happened was the TV put journos on there.
You reckon? Why is that? Walk us through that.
Because everyone's ego just went like that.
You want to be the journo.
I'm not talking about those two men in particular.
Yeah.
But people seem to like journos talking on TV shows.
On TV, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, they're usually a little bit of a spike in the ratings.
It's interesting because like a guy like Kenty, you know, he's been. I don't think people appreciate how, as you just said, like there's a reason why they're in their position where they're in. As I said, I think there's a lot of people that disagree with a lot of what they say, but you don't get to their position unless you've got a lot of contacts in the game, the right people to call.
Yeah, you don't make it. People seem to think there's this like you just make things up. Honestly, there wouldn't be. If a journo's making them up, they'll get found out pretty quickly. You know. Yeah. Like those guys in particular who have been around a long time and have a big network, like they're ahead of the game. Weidler's the same. Yeah. Danny's the same.
Danny the Weidler, the great Danny Weidler.
Danny Weidler.
He gets in shot. He can get in shot.
He does like getting in shot.
Oh
doesn't he?
Yeah, get that.
He did it with Mitchell Moses the other day.
You got in shot again?
Yeah.
Mate, he loves it, eh?
He does.
He's
a star. See, I hate TV.
Really?
Yeah.
What was it? What's your experience? When was your first invite onto doing TV?
2010. Steve Crawley, when he was at 9, asked me to go on there.
Okay.
No, I'll tell you who it was. It was Matty Johns.
No way.
Yeah, remember Matty's show on Channel 7? And I kept saying no to it because I was like, I don't want to fucking go on TV. You know, I'm a writer. And then they told me the money, and I went,
okay.
I can do this every week. You can do it every day if you want.
Yeah, I could. Okay, so
and we're about to go on air live, and Matty goes, "You've done this before." I said, "No, this is the first time." I went, this will be fun. And then I went, all right. And Steve Crawley got me on 9 quite a bit. So
yeah, okay. Steve Crawley's with Fox now.
He's with Fox, yeah.
He's a big dog.
But I get too sweaty.
Yeah, okay.
Too sweaty with the lights, and particularly if you've had a big night, big day, the big day / night before day nighter, always dangerous for live television.
I can imagine.
No sleep.
None of that happens here, mate.
No, good. This is like I see, it's a very professional setup.
Except the beer in front of me.
Exactly. When do we crack these?
Walk us through the Super League Wars, because you would have quite a deep insight.
I just started.
What was that like as a new journo?
I was in Newcastle, so that was one of the real battlefronts. And it was, you talk to particularly more experienced journos from that time, they said you couldn't be wrong, you know, because anything you wrote, like it was just flying. No one was denying anything. And it was like when you got half of it was like basically media company versus media company, news versus Channel 9 or Kerry Packer. Yeah. So, you know, they're in the news business. They leaked like
News Limited is Murdoch, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's some great stories from that time about how basically one of the great stories I reckon from Super League, and it revolves around the Broncos and Bennett, is how they thought on April 1, it was all like it had been written about and talked about, and there had been injunctions for a couple of years, but in early 96, on April Fool's Day, the Broncos were going to be the first club to sign.
On April Fool's Day?
On April Fool's Day. And Lachlan Murdoch and John Rebo were due to meet all the Broncos players in the car park at the old ANZ Stadium.
Wow.
And that's when it was that.
QE2?
Yeah, it might have been. It was either QE2 or the Red Hill. I think it might have been QE2. Anyway. And Bennett had always said 3 or 4 days beforehand, if I don't want the story to get out, I want us to play the Cowboys on the Friday night, and then I'll tell the players after the game to come and we'll sign the contracts for Super League. Anyway, the story got out that day. Anyway, Bennett hit the roof.
Yeah.
And he said to Rebo, "We're not coming." No, he just told his players, "We're not going." So here's John Rebo and Lachlan Murdoch in the car park waiting for the Broncos to turn up.
No way.
They weren't there.
Yeah.
So instead of, it took them, they had to stay there for a few extra days to try and secure the Broncos. Everyone thought the Broncos were done and dusted because John Rebo, who was the CEO, was also the architect of Super League. So they had to stay in Brisbane to get it done, which meant they had a delay in getting from there to Newcastle. So because they didn't get it to Newcastle in time, in that time, Paul Harrigan went down to Phillip Street, met with the Australian Rugby League, signed up with them, went back, and because they'd signed up, because Chief had signed up, the Knights were basically stitched up as well because they all wanted to stay together.
Wow.
So how Bennett's
impact on rugby league.
stubbornness and principles, because he said if it gets out, then we're not going to
do it.
We're not going to, he was pissed off about it. He stopped them getting to Newcastle in time to.
And that would have been
sign.
almost the last piece in the puzzle.
Changed the course of history.
Newey goes, they all go, pretty much.
They would have won the War Super League.
Wow.
We would have been looking at a different game for sure.
It just shows you these historic moments with these historic figures. Wow, that is insane. And all because it leaked.
I'm giving you all the gold from my book.
Mate,
no one will have to read the
more.
fucking thing.
Mate, there'll be plenty more. I mean, geez, you're talking about Wayne Bennett. He's around for 1,000 years.
He has been.
So I'm sure there are many stories.
There's lots.
There's lots.
I'm trying to work out which ones
to put in.
Which ones to leave out.
Far out. That's incredible.
Yeah, but that was a pretty crazy time, Super League.
So the Broncos go across, and basically the whole comp gets split in two.
Yeah.
Where were like?
So I was in Newcastle.
Yeah.
And so the Hunter Mariners got formed, and that was Newcastle was such a stronghold for the ARL. Ken Arthurson dedicated his book to Newcastle because they stuck so solid and were so supportive, and they were a working class coal mining, area. So they weren't going to really. That doesn't surprise me that they'd go that path. But I remember the Mariners players, like the Newcastle people would spit at them in the street.
Really?
Yeah, it was really hostile.
Wow.
Really hostile. A few of their players went over. Mark Sargent, who'd been at the Knights, he went over. Robbie McCormack, Noddy, Brett Camorley, they all went over. And they were. I think they made the World Club Challenge final against Brisbane. So they weren't a legless team. Yeah. But yeah, it was ugly. It was ugly.
Wow, far out. And so, are there any yarns that you've? I mean, I've heard. I think Freddie has talked about how he walked into ARL or something, and they offered him a certain amount. Apologies if it isn't Freddie. I think it might be. Yeah, it's Freddie. It's Freddie. And he was like, "Oh, all right, think about it." He walked out, and apparently someone else had walked in and said, "I want more." And then he walked back in and he earned 250 grand.
There's heaps of stories like that. Player agents signing players to ARL contracts after they'd retired.
No way.
Oh yeah, I won't say the manager, but he was writing them. And I remember Gus, who was one of the main negotiators, said, "Mate, that bloke's retired." He said, "He's making a comeback."
Just the money.
There's a story about Gus and Bob Fulton when they actually went up and secured the Knights.
Yeah.
And they all went up there and they'd had just signed all these players on millions and millions of dollars worth of contracts, and they'd forgotten their credit cards for whatever reason because they'd had to get up there in a hurry. So they stopped stopped on the way back for a feed late at night, but none of them could pay for it because they didn't have their cards on them. Wow. And it's like, hang on, we've just signed contracts worth millions of dollars, and no one can pay for the fucking steak sandwich we just ate.
Oh my God. And so it's really...
You get Gus going on. Gus is hilarious just about how
it all come together.
Yeah, yeah.
It's interesting, Wayne Bennett and Gus have always had this kind of strange rivalry. There's a bit of respect there. There's a bit of Queensland, New South Wales there. But you go even deeper. There's a Super League war there.
Yeah.
Where if Broncos don't go to Super League, then it probably falls over, I'd assume, because they were so big then.
It would have for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as I said, the main thing is they couldn't get to Newcastle and sign up Newey. Yeah. But I reckon, and I've spoken to Matty Johns about this, I reckon they would have gone.
You reckon?
Yeah, because all they wanted to do was stay together. And the Knights are on the bones of their arse. They were a really poor club, despite their popularity. So, yeah, changed the course of history.
So what was Chiefs' thought process? Loyalty?
Loyalty, for sure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and he went down to Sydney first, to Phillip Street, and met with Arco and Quayle and all those guys. And the fact that he sort of was secured first, it helped them keep Newey.
Yeah, wow. That's incredible. I mean, stay tuned for the book, boys. You'll get a much more detailed story.
Exactly. Don't worry about the extracts. Buy the book.
You also would have been around when essentially footy players first became professional.
Yeah.
Did you see a big swing in...
That was sort of from Super League onwards, for sure, yeah.
Did you see a big change in the footy player in that time or not really? It was pretty much the same.
It's funny, I talked to players from that. I still reckon... Well, you'd know this. I reckon that early 2000s, you talk to players from that period, they all say that was the best time to play. That's when it was fun, because it was professionalising, and they trained that way, but they still could, it wasn't as restrictive as it is now.
Like when I was coming through, even so, I come through 2005. Like 5 is my first year. There was no restriction. There was no you can't go out and have a beer. Like you were loved by the public. Like
yeah, right.
The public wasn't trying to get you in trouble. They would cover for you.
That's the worst thing for it. Phones.
Yeah, the phones. Whereas
phones changed everything.
They really did, because it come in towards the end of when I was finishing. But I've told this story before, but I was at the Normby. This is the difference this would never happen today, in my opinion. I could be wrong. So I was at the Normby at the height of my career, which is a very short blip, very short up and down. And basically, I was with a couple of girls. We were just walking past, and some dude tried to hit on one of them. She was like, "No, thanks." And then he was like, "You're a slut, rah rah." And then, no, I just barred him. I was like, "Mate, call him a slut. Like, have some respect." Like,
yeah, 100%.
And then he arced up. Anyway, we got in a scuffle. I ended up leaving the Normby, and basically I left with the girl as well. So we all left, and so I basically was like, "Oh man, like this. Hopefully this doesn't get out. Like getting in a scuffle. What am I like? No one's going to believe that he actually did that.
That you were doing the right thing.
Exactly.
Sure.
No one's going to believe I'm actually trying to make him respect the women in the bloody joint." And so I was like, "Oh, hopefully nothing comes of it." Anyway, so I get like a message or a call. I think he might have got my number. The owner of it calls me and he's like, "Hey mate, can you come into the Normby?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm done here. Like, it's going to be in the paper." Because again, I was at Brisbane, top try scorer at the time in the NRL, so it would have been a good story to write.
Yeah.
Not that I'm some superstar or anything, but
oh please.
Well, I wasn't. I got on the end of Lockie's good play. Anyway, get to the Normby, and he takes me into the footage room, and I was like, "Oh man, he's going to like slap my wrist and be like, 'Mate, this is what you did, rah rah.'" And he goes, "See this?" And he like played it, and he's like, "Oh, deleted the whole thing." He said, "Mate, nothing to worry about. Don't worry about it." And that was it.
There you go.
Different time, man.
They wouldn't do that now.
There's no way.
Okay.
His name's Darren. He's an absolute legend. He actually follows the page now. Some of the stories in Normby are insane.
I hate the off-field stuff. The only time I ever write, look, and I there's nothing worse than a hypocrite in the media. So I'll never, God, I can be as loose as anybody. So I'll never criticise anyone for getting hammered or smashed or making mistakes or whatever. I have to report about it when there's police involved, charges, disciplinary action from the club. But God, I get it as much as anybody. I like, young blokes make mistakes.
Yeah.
God, I'm old and make mistakes.
Well,
but I remember one of the stories, I was thinking about this while coming here about how things have changed. It's like, so I used to live in Coogee, and I was drinking at the Clovelly Hotel the day that the Bulldogs were there. This would be 2007. The next day I got a call. They said, "Were you there when the incident happened with Sonny Bill and Candace Falzone?" And I said, "No, I don't know what you're talking about." So they told me what had happened. And there was footage of it. There was a video of it. Do you want to do anything about it? And this shows you how much things have changed. I went, look, that's not really a story that I'd be interested in. But I wanted to cover my ass, and I called my editor. And I said, mate, what do you think of this? He goes, that's not a Herald story. Let's not touch it.
Yeah,
He said, but ring. So I rung the All Brothers, who managed him at the time, and I said, listen, so you know, this is going to come out at some stage. And if it does and the shit hits the fan and Sonny wants to clear the air, then, mate, I'm here. They said, yeah, no worries. That was it. The Telegraph broke it on the Wednesday, and then the footage came out, or the photo came out the day after. And then I got a call from Sonny Bill one night about 11 p.m. He said, oh, hey, Andrew, it's Sonny. And I thought it was a mate of mine taking the piss. I said, who is it? They said, no, it's Sonny.
Yeah.
Sonny. He said, do you want to come down and do a story?
Yeah.
So we got his side of the story, and that ran in the papers on the Sunday.
Yeah, wow.
But these days, that would not happen.
No,
that wouldn't
way.
be. It'd be up straight away.
It would be immediately up. Wouldn't even be a question. Yeah, just a different.
That just shows you how much but that's only 15 years.
Yeah, it's not that long ago, really.
No.
It's I'm with you.
But who's taking photos and then trying to sell them off
What
like
kind
that?
of person's doing that?
Fucking idiots.
And we never talk about that part of it. Like, do you know what I mean? We just focus. Look, it's a mistake. But like, the biggest grub of the lot is the person taking photos and then selling it to the media.
Terrible.
Yeah, I'm the same, mate. Like, for example, I think a perfect example is like the Latrell Jackie Whiten thing. Like, that shouldn't be in the pay. Or the Dragons argument. Like,
I know. But with
the charge one, I can understand because the police actually charged him. But like, people making a big deal of it, it's like, come on, but they're not doing anything.
I know.
The Dragons one as well. Like, that's not like.
No.
How's that getting to the paper? First of all, who's leaking that?
But that's the thing. The fact that got leaked.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's outrageous. Like, the fact that blokes have an argument, they shouldn't have been out, they shouldn't have been arguing.
But that's a sign of a club that's in trouble.
Yeah.
You know, if it's a good, strong, solid club, that doesn't get out.
Yeah.
But you're right. I got frustrated with the Latrell Jack one.
I understand.
It's such a nothing thing.
It is a nothing thing.
It's such a nothing thing. But the thing is, they got charged by the cops.
I know. So you have to.
So you can't get away from it,
Yeah.
you know? And that's what I hate. And people go, oh, you fucking grub because you reported that. Do you honestly think... Do you think I really want to write about Jack Whiten and Latrell Mitchell wrestling on the ground?
Yeah.
I could not give two fucks.
Yeah, but it is news.
But I think people... I just think people think that, you know... And also, sometimes you can't ignore it. Sometimes you've got an editor saying, I need something on this.
Yeah, I mean, Latrell, like, put it this way. If it was anyone smaller, I think it would just be like, nothing story, whatever. But it's Latrell Mitchell and Jackie Whiten. Like, 100%. Of course it's going to be in the paper.
Yeah.
But in an idealistic world, it would be like, guys.
I go far, but but they also... if people knew how many, like I've been out to dinners I've had wrecked because something's happened and something's broken and, you know, like your whole day, your whole weeks can be just consumed with bullshit stories around, you know, player misbehaviour. It's like, I don't want to write about any of this stuff.
Yeah.
I've got better things to do.
Yeah. And you love the game too.
Yeah.
You want to talk about the good yarns that are like, how crazy is this? Okay, so the Super League war happens and obviously they become professional. What about... what was it like being... Obviously, I was playing at this time or in a squad or whatever, but the Melbourne Storm situation, because that was... When you hear some of the stories...
Are you talking about the Cap story?
Yeah, the Cap story.
So I'd gone to the Telegraph by then.
Yeah.
I had 5 years at the Telegraph from 2009. This is when Buzz hired me.
No way.
Went from wanting to fight me to hire me.
All right, how you earned his respect. Did you ever get to fight? Get that fight out of the way?
We had to...
Get a wrestle out the front of a pub?
No. He always wants to punch me. He always wants to blue me. I always say, Buzz, I'll give you the first 3 punches.
Mate. The poor fella might fall over.
Buzz was always funny. He was funny to work with. He's quite a mad scientist, Buzz. He's very good at engineering. An evil genius, I think, is the best way to describe him.
He's an ornament of rugby league.
But he is. But I tell you, it's funny when the Melbourne Storm thing happened. It was really funny. It was really strange for the Telegraph or the News Corp because they owned the Storm, and here they were covering it. So they wanted to be very transparent, and they didn't want to be seen to be running an agenda through their papers. So the Telegraph got leaked nothing.
Wow.
They leaked mostly stuff. Got leaked more to the Herald.
Okay.
Because I wanted to try and be transparent. And I remember one day I was chasing an angle on the Storm saga, and it was one of the biggest that was such a big story.
Oh, mate.
When that story broke, I was actually at lunch. I was at lunch with Buzz. Me and Buzz and a few others. We were on at a long liquid lunch, and that story broke. So we had to go and front the press conference.
Straight away, like,
believe me, we sobered up.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, because that story went for months.
That was bonkers, that story.
Yeah, crazy. But because so as it sort of all played out, the telly got nothing at all, and I got the shits one day in the office. I said, well, why the fuck are we even here if we're not going to get any help with this story, and no one's going to tell us anything? And I was at my desk, and word must have filtered back to John Hardigan, who was the CEO of News Corp at the time, and he called me on my landline. He said, look, Andrew, we have to play this one straight, so no leg ups from us. So don't worry about it. Don't worry if we get beaten on a story. That's just how it goes.
Yeah.
I got off the phone and went, the CEO of the company just said to me, don't worry if you get beaten on a story. And I went, I'm going to the pub for the afternoon. Done.
So the CEO... Why were they giving it to the competitor?
Because they didn't want to be seen to be. They had a conflict of interest.
Yeah. Okay.
So they own the Telegraph and they also own the Storm. So they didn't want, and a lot of it was around. Remember when South got kicked out of the comp and South marched the streets and there was like 78,000 people, and the Telegraph ran the story really small, and they got accused of bias because at the time News Limited half owned the game.
Yeah,
and it was their criteria that helped get South out of the comp. So they didn't want to be seen as biased this time around with Melbourne, who they owned. So, weird situation.
Wow, it's kind of like the Broncos. Are they still owned by News Limited?
Yes.
So
they're the majority shareholder.
It's an interesting relationship. Let's put it that way.
It certainly is. News has fingerprints everywhere. But I got out of there in 2013.
Okay. What grand final for you has been the best to cover? Or a best story?
Well, I'm a Dragons man.
Okay, 10.
So 2010. Everyone's going to think I'm a drunk, but I was quite hungover at that game.
Okay.
I got a bit excited.
Yep.
That week, and I'd gone to the races.
Understandable.
I'd gone to the races the day before. I remember getting to the ground and sitting there. I was so nervous, and remember they were down at half time.
Yeah.
And I was getting so shitty, and I was starting to sweat. And then the thing is, when you cover night games, you got to follow your story right on full time.
Yeah, wow.
So like you're sitting there watching it, and you're writing. And I was actually sitting next to Kenty in the press box, and I didn't. And this story was going to run on the front page of the paper, and I'm like going, what am I going to lead with? So I started to panic. I didn't know what the first sentence was going to be.
Yeah.
And I said, what am I going to lead with? And there was someone in the stands holding up a banner saying, choke on that. And I went, that'll do. Choke on that. Ran on the front page of the telly the next day.
Far out. That's good.
But that grand final was pretty special.
Yep.
Just because I was a Dragons man. I remember going into the dressing room afterwards and Craig Young sitting there, next to Dean, and they're both just sitting there in tears. This is like an hour and a half after full time.
Yeah.
Thought, Jesus, that sort of summed up how special it is.
Absolutely.
But I still think the Cowboys one was unbelievable.
Yeah,
because the press box was sitting right behind JT, and I'd written in the paper for the prediction. They said, "Who's your tip?" And I said, Cowboys by 2, a curling sideline conversion from Jonathan Thurston to break the deadlock, and he hit the post.
Oh my God, you would have been a clairvoyant.
I want to look like a legend. I want to look like I knew what I was talking about.
Okay, what about the darkest day in sport with the whole Cronulla Sharks, Shandor situation?
Terrible.
Didn't he get hung out to dry, Shandor?
It's funny, I was actually stumbled across that story from the other day.
Yeah.
Talk about thrown under the bus.
Oh, mate.
Absolutely. The way Asada behaved through that whole thing was terrible. It's like we sort of know something, and then we're going to go after it.
It was bizarre, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Super aggressive and like... You think like an organisation, and maybe it's completely changed now, but...
For a government organisation.
You'd think they would be less gun-ho chest-beaty, you know what I mean? And they'd be more clinical about what's happening. Like, we just want to find the truth. That's it.
So their tactic was, let's say that the organised crime and drugs are infiltrating every major code to try and flush out everybody. They didn't. They flushed out 2 clubs and 1 player.
So but
the way Chandor got pulled, I still think it was. I don't know. There's so many things with the Cronulla thing I thought were really poor. Like the way that Cronulla tried to finger Trent Elkin and put it all on him. I thought that was shit. You know, I got to talk to Elkin a few.
So who was Trent Elkin in this situation?
He was a SNC at Cronulla.
Strength and conditioning.
Yeah, he was a strength and conditioning guy at Cronulla, and he was accused of being the one who introduced Dank and everyone to the club. There were some players at that club who were still, after 3 weeks of injections and the creams and all that, there were still 2 or 3 players at that club who were seeing, you know, Stephen Dank and the Gazelle a year later. You know, got the same band as the bloke who, the 20-year-old kid who didn't know what he was doing. Yeah, and I think that was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, if you, with the Shandor situation, like he had a shoulder reconstruction, and then they went through his phone and they charged him for, I think, distribution or something like that, because he said, I've got a mate that can do whatever. Like, it's far out. Yeah, hectic.
Yeah, that was a rough period. Because everyone was so suspicious of it, you know, like everyone, who else is on the gear and who else is doing it, and and it was also like trying to work out what the drugs were that they were taking, like were they banned or not. And,
I think at the point they allegedly did anything, they weren't on the banned list.
No, but then you also can't be injecting things that you don't, which was unclassified. So. Yeah, that was a shit time.
That was wild, eh? The darkest day in sport. Oh, my God.
Very rough.
I mean, Shandor literally moved to Bali and lived there for a year or two. Started to shop everything.
And he's such a good kid.
He's such a nice guy.
He just didn't deserve that at all.
No way. Like, that was tough time.
But everyone was trying to throw each other under the bus so they could keep their own jobs. And that's... Yeah, I thought that was peak rugby league.
That is rugby league. That is rugby league. What about the Rabbitohs do you have any insight in the Rabbitohs getting kicked out of the comp and then back in?
That was just they were trying to cull the amount of teams. You know, some clubs like St George and Illawarra, they merged. The Tigers and West, they merged, and then they had come up with a criteria to get rid of teams like South. Worst mistake they ever did.
Yeah, wow.
You know,
what was the criteria? Because I think
it was just like around finances. The problem with South is when they got back in the comp, a lot of it was around finances and crowds and members, and like it couldn't have been around juniors and history. Yeah, but when they got back in the comp, they just didn't make the most of it. They were struggling financially. They were just battling, and it was like
Russell Crowe to bloody turn around.
Well, George Piggins saved him. It took Russell to get him to the next level.
Yeah.
That was an ugly shit fight too.
What, the Russell situation?
Oh, yeah.
What happened there?
Oh, that was a real dirty tricks campaign. There was PIs like investigating the different parties, and
because I saw a post recently. Didn't George Piggins and his partner just become life members? And that
him
was
and
a big deal?
Nolene, they handed in their life memberships.
Yep.
And now they've taken it back.
Wow. Okay. So
I reckon the way South have come back, and I think South. It's funny. The two Sydney clubs that hate each other the most, the Roosters and South, are the 2 best run clubs out of the lot.
Yeah, really.
They're really strong. Yeah. And, you know, this is why I love the game, Denon. It's like, you know, it's the game that you and I love, that the man on the street loves, but then you've got Nick Politis, who's worth $2.2 billion, and then you've got Russell Crowe, who's Russell Crowe, and they're just like, you know, they're just ridiculous, headless fans like the rest of us.
Yeah, they love it just as much. I think that,
mate, I've been to I've been to Russell's place at Woolloomooloo a couple of times to interview him, and mate, we just sit on that back balcony, and he sits there and chain smokes durries and sits there and talks about footy for, you know, an hour before you even get into the first question about what you're there for. It. And then you got Nick. I remember Nick called me once. I wrote a story about when they were trying to push Craig Fitzgibbon into retirement. He was at the end, and they could only offer him a small amount. And Fitz was done anyway. And I wrote this tiny story that appeared in the Herald, and I got a call from Nick, and he just ripped me to shreds. And I went, oi, oi, oi. I said, how many fucking great stories have I written about the Roosters over the years? He went, you know what, baby? You're right. It's okay. I love you. And I could hear the water, and I said, Nick, where are you? He goes, I'm in Greece at the beach. And I was like, for Christ's sake, you've got nothing better to do than call me about a 300-word piece about Fitzy in the Herald.
That's how much he loves it.
He's no different.
Yeah, wow.
He's no different.
That's
He's
incredible.
still just as fired up. I spoke to him the other day after the Dolphins loss.
Oh, wow.
He was very upset.
Yeah.
So imagine being that passionate. And
It's so good for the game.
It is.
People as powerful and as wealthy as that, being as invested as they are.
yeah.
Because they're the kind of people that get you to next
Don't
levels.
mention the sombrero.
Oh.
He hates that.
Oh, really?
He hates it.
Wow. I
Yeah.
mean, because from his perspective,
Good
he
business
works-
sense.
Well, yeah, they work so hard to do what they do. He'd be frustrated, I guess.
But if I was a young player and if I could go to I know everyone talks about their cap, right? I get it. Like, I mean, look at the players they've signed, like Lenu, or they're about to sign
I
Lenu
think
and
also
Young and
the journos reporting on the numbers doesn't help either. Like, for example, saying Suoliti's on 750k is outrageous. There's no way.
you don't think he's on that
There's
amount?
no way. You telling me he's on 750?
He should
Teddy's
be.
on $1 million.
He should be.
He should be on 750 for sure, but I don't think he's on 750. Joey Manu, Daniel Tupou, you reckon that? No way.
Honestly, I reckon you're right because
No way.
no,
It's impossible. It just wouldn't. They couldn't do it.
maybe.
And so
I don't want to cast any aspersions.
No, I don't. I think he's manager.
But I do think players, and I know it sounds like bullshit, but I reckon players go there for less.
100%
They do. And I reckon a big part of it is you look at all those players, if they're like a Boyd or a Friendy or Mini or whoever, if you're part of the furniture there,
Yeah.
if you're loyal to the club, if you're as loyal to the Roosters as Nick is, you're set for life, baby.
Yeah, he'll always help you out.
He'll always help you out. He'll always be part of the family. But if you shit on him and if you try and play them off another club off, then he'll just walk. He'll go.
Done. Yeah.
He'll go.
Yeah. It's and to be fair, like every club has influential figures like that. Just Roosters seem to do it the best. Like Broncos have influential figures, Rabbitohs have influential figures. So,
But Buzz and I went on the just before COVID started. They had the World Cup Challenge in against St Helens, and that's when they went to Barcelona first. And Buzz and I were on the junket to go and cover it. Me and Buzz sitting back in
best mates.
best mates in business class, living the dream,
The dream.
flying to Barcelona.
Yeah, talking footy.
And I said, and they sent the Roosters on that trip, and they did big tours of Barcelona FC to try and get ideas, and they have that with their academy and shit like that. But they sent 40 members, that's staff and players, 40 members of their squad and coaching staff, and some of their front office staff to Barcelona, then to Manchester, where they were based and then against St Helens for the World Club Challenge, and they all flew business class.
Yeah, $1 million all up?
What would it be? 40 times. It's a lot.
Probably more than $1 million.
these are pre-COVID airfares, but still, it wouldn't have been cheap. No,
Maybe $500,000.
No.
All the accommodation. Oh man, it'd be expensive.
You reckon the Dragons are sending any, all their players and coaching staff to
It's a good point.
on business class?
Has there been any story where you've had, like, back in the day or whatever, where you've had a beer with a bloke and it's just like as in a player or something and something outrageous has happened?
Where there's been drama.
Just a good story that you like.
Oh, God.
One night we're out here doing this. Have you been on tour with the Kangaroos or anything like that before?
Yeah. I went that Four Nations. I have. I'm just trying to think. God.
Actually, let's talk about the start of COVID. Was that would have been an interesting time with, like, are you going to shut down? Are we going to open up? What's going on with the government? What was going on there?
Remember when the NRL got they had the biosecurity advice to shut down, and so they shut down. And they were talking about a long period of time. I remember meeting, like, at the press conference, and Brent Reid and I went into one of the boardroom at the NRL with Volandis and Todd Greenberg was the CEO. And I said, "What if they shut you down for 6 months, PVL?" He goes, "We'll find another expert to come up with a different timeline." That's crazy, mate. That was one of the craziest times in the game.
Was so bizarre.
The stories changed by the day.
And you look back and you go, you know what? Him being as aggressive as he was kind of right when you think about it.
Oh, yeah.
Like these young athletes, they're fit as healthy as anything.
The whole thing about Volandis is he's like, you know, crash or crash through. That's his MO. And I thought I was a bit critical of him early on. I thought, mate, you know, people are losing their jobs, people are losing their lives, and you're worried about getting rugby league back. But he could see that the finances of the game were so dire that they needed to get back sooner than later. Otherwise, the game would have been, you know, I don't know if it would have folded, but it would have been a pretty bad way. It certainly would have opened itself up to private equity investors who would have bought the shit out of the game, and who knows what we would have had now. But he saved the game, and he dragged all the other sports along with it.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So the chat about the game being in dire straits, and the year before they just had a $50 million surplus, I think.
Yeah.
And so that was genuine?
In 2019.
I think so, yeah.
That
was the information I read anyway. That $50 million is what they did the year before, I think, surplus.
Yeah.
So those yarns about the game being financially...
Because there's going to be no broadcast money coming in. That's why the whole thing around broadcast and non-broadcast revenue is so important, because the game has basically been TV's bitch for so long, which I hate. You know. Oh,
I wish there was a way where the NRL could almost take the product in-house
of the NFL
and sell it, like the NFL does, because I think like it would look. It's probably never going to happen, but in a perfect world, if you had enough resources, if I was the NRL, I'd be keeping everything in-house. I'd be making it so you can just subscribe to the NRL to watch the rugby league, and that way, when you do go to Fox Sports and that, you can go, well, if you don't want to, you know, put it on or whatever, or Channel 9,
we'll put it there.
We'll just get people to subscribe.
I think anti-siphoning laws here would mean you've got to have some of it on free to air.
I mean, but it'd be a mix. I'm not saying it would just.
I just think, like, all right, take the first game of the season. I think it's ridiculous that they said there was 17,000 there. They must have been counting legs. Like would have been 8,000 there for sure. It was terrible. For the first match of the season, Storm, Parramatta, CommBank. They're the grand finalists from last year. I know it's a Thursday night, but because they're kicking off at 8:05, they get a crowd like that. And I remember sitting there, and I brought this up with Andrew Webster the other day. I said, mate, in the next TV deal, surely in this day and age, we can get away from, like you can stream everything, you've got multiple digital channels, and we're still beholden to Channel 9. This is probably going to get me sacked, but we're still beholden to Channel 9 and a current affair in terms of the kickoff time.
Yeah.
Like, why don't you put football on at the time when people will watch it?
Yeah.
Like in the NFL, if you have a Thursday night, if clubs have a Thursday night game, the NFL give those clubs $2 million for extra marketing and tickets and to try and get it to make sure they sell it out.
Yeah. Okay.
If the NFL's doing that, then surely rugby league should be trying to do something, because, you know, people don't turn up if the game's on after 8 o'clock on a weeknight.
The game is quite late. Like even me, like when it's hitting 9:30, 9:45, I'm going, mate, just done. I'm done.
Exactly.
I'm out. And if you're out there, by the time you travel home, you're getting home at like 11:30 or something.
If you're in this day and age, like, I just can't believe the game's so dictated to by when a current affair's coming on. I mean, seriously.
We have no assets to fall back on like the AFL do. They got that massive stadium where they just go, all right, we'll just borrow on that, be sweet.
I covered that game last Thursday.
Oh, yeah?
I've never seen anything more disgusting in the rooms afterwards than Cameron Munster's finger.
No way.
Holy hell.
Like, so you saw his finger?
We went and interviewed him afterwards. He was hilarious.
He's a legend.
Yeah, he's a legend. He must have had a lot of painkillers in it because it was fine, but he opened it up and, mate, it was like this bloodied pulp. It's like someone had tortured him and ripped his fingernail off. That's really rough.
What are your thoughts on the recent discussion around like HIA, concussion, everything? Like, it feels like it's the game's biggest challenge in the next 10 to 20 years, maybe ever. What are your thoughts on that?
I get it. I think they're petrified of being sued. I think they're genuinely worried about what happened in the AFL happening in rugby league. And when you've got some former players talking about class actions. And I remember when this all kicked off a couple of years ago, I had a ambulance chasing lawyer call me and said, look, I'm thinking about getting all these players together and launching a class action against the NRL. Do you want to be part of it and be their cheerleader for it? And I went, get fucked.
No,
I don't, mate. At all. I think the problem is you'd understand this better than me. I think the whole belief that head-high tackles are the only reason players get concussed. Like, I think just jamming through a head-high rule, or jamming through a new sort of stronger ruling on any contact with the head to try and think that's going to eliminate concussion is just bullshit. You know, I think that just shows you how much they don't understand it.
It's an interesting one because, like, I'm personally of the mind, like, I can understand if the NRL was holding information back because the NFL situation,
They covered up.
they were literally covering it up.
Yeah.
Whereas, to my understanding, as soon as the NRL knew about this kind of stuff, they let all the players know this is the reality of the situation. So, for me personally, I can't speak for anyone else, but if you came through in my era at least and you wanted to sue, I would be like, are you serious, mate? You knew what you were doing. Like,
Yeah.
you knew what you were doing.
Yeah.
Everyone is a consenting adult. We all knew that if we played rugby league, we would get some kind of brain damage. You can't turn around now and sue the game that gave you everything because, you know what I mean? Like,
You talk to Joe about this stuff. The game's not for everybody.
it really isn't.
But that's the problem. I think there's a belief that, you know, that it's the same work conditions as,
Yeah, it's
you know,
not.
me in a newsroom. It's not how it works.
But that's why we get all the glory in our quotation marks. That's why, you know, NRL players are so respected and, you know, lauded. It's because you're willing to put your body on the line in the gladiator arena kind of thing.
I also think it's wrong when the NRL really ran a campaign with it the couple of years ago, remember? And, you know, the way that they pushed out poor old Steve Mortimer and a few other former players and said, look, this is what happens if you don't protect the head or if you let concussion run. It was like, yeah, well, they played in the fucking 80s.
Yeah, I know.
It was a bit different then.
Way different back then.
Mario Fenix was sponsored by Captain Snooze because he was knocked out so many times.
Yeah.
If you go through all those old files, which I've had to for when writing books, it's like he was knocked out every second game.
Yeah.
But the game's not like that
It's not
anymore.
like
It's
that
like
anymore.
it's completely sort of flipped.
It's especially like even in my era, like if you got concussed, they would lift you up and say, get back out there. But ever since, it's probably like, 2012, 10 to 12, where it's completely flipped on its head,
Yeah,
like a better word.
you're not game to not pull someone off.
Oh, mate,
know?
you wouldn't, like, no way.
If anything, you use the rule to try and get an interchange. That's
we saw it all the time.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Absolutely.
That's funny. Well, I remember I wrote a story a couple of years ago about, I'll say it was Parramatta, about how they seemed to be getting a HIA for a big forward around the 20-minute mark every game. And I wrote the story. I remember Brad Arthur was filthy with me. I said, mate, look, the NRL looking at it, so makes it a legitimate story.
Yeah.
So it just happened to be a coincidence that a big prop was coming off at 20 minutes with the
HIA.
HIA.
Far out. Yeah.
Sorry, Parramatta. I'm not trying to...
Clubs game the system all the time. And anyone that thinks they don't, come on now.
Exactly.
Come on now.
So no independent doctors?
Look.
That was one of the great Ricky Stuart sprays. Only Ricky Stuart could whinge about the NRL using independent doctors and find it as a reason to give it to Clint Newton and the RLPA.
RLPA. I was like,
It was vintage Ricky.
him bringing up the RLPA, I was like, what? Where's this come
It
from?
was very... Clint Newton had a good quote. He said, well, you know, you can tick that off, one Ricky Stuart spray for the year. Round one.
Round one, ready to go.
I love Stick. I get on well with Ricky.
He is so good for the game.
He is.
He really is. And
He
I mean that
is.
genuinely. Like, okay, you might disagree with, like, I strongly disagree with his take on the weekend, but he still adds so much to the game. Like,
Spits.
he
Used to hate me, Ricky.
Oh, really?
We had a massive blue. We had a couple of massive fights. But yeah, when I first started, I remember I wrote a few stories that he didn't like, and after a game they'd lost to the Warriors, and he'd been fined for criticising the refs the week before, and the refs in this game were fucking terrible. And I said to him, "What do you think of the refs?" "No, not saying anything. I'll get in trouble." I said, "I know, but can you talk about..." "No, Andrew, I'm not doing it." Afterwards, like one of the media guys for the Roosters came up and said, "That's entrapment. You're trying to get him fined." And then Ricky came at me, and then Politis came and he had this big black coat came at me. I was like, "Oh, this is fun." And then after that, we were sweet.
Yeah.
When he was New South Wales coach, I remember it was a couple of days before there was a decider. Must have been 12, I think it was, in Brisbane. And it was 3 days beforehand. And I went and had a drink with him because they all like drink through Origin.
Yeah.
And we were sitting there, and all his assistant coaches, like after I got there, they all sort of slowly peeled away. 3 a.m. in the morning, and I'm like, Right, stick. That's enough for me, mate. He goes, why? Why are you going? I said, well, it's 3 a.m. and I'm tired and I'm blind, so I can't do this anymore, mate. I said, are you going to bed? He goes, no. Why would I do that? What am I going to do? I'm not going to sleep. See him at training the next day, ready to go. Ready to go.
Oh, yeah.
The great line, Dean Ritchie asked him before the 2002 grand final, he said, some people say you're paranoid. No, I'm not. Who's been saying that? That's vintage.
The great Ricky Stuart. He's so good for the game.
You should get Ricky on this.
I would love to.
Because when he's angry, he spits.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you know that?
No, I've never seen it in person.
He spits. No, that's not fucking right.
Oh, I'll get a bucket next to him.
I love him.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. Who's been the best player? Like, who's the best bloke you've ever had to deal with in rugby league? Number one bloke.
That's a good question. Timmy Manor.
Really?
Timmy Manor. I've always had a soft spot for Timmy. Such a good guy.
Yeah.
The Min Cat. Mini. Yep.
He's one of the greats.
I went to a Super Bowl, the first Super Bowl I ever covered. I've covered 3. The first one I did was 2016 in San Fran, and him and Robbie Farah and a few others were on that trip. And I'll never forget. I think I could tell this story.
So.
We went out on this a few nights before the game. We went out on must have been the Wednesday night. We went to this steakhouse, and then we went to Marquee nightclub, had a pop-up nightclub in San Fran. So we walked in there, and the whole American thing about getting a booth. And so we've got this hostess there, and she's going, you guys want this booth? And we're sort of up and down about it because it's going to cost a lot of money.
Thousands of dollars.
Yeah, there's lots of money. And she goes, can you make up your mind, because Ludacris, the rapper, he wants the booth.
Yeah.
And Minnie goes, fuck Ludacris. I'm the Min Cat.
And he's damn right.
And I went, she was like, the who? I was on the ground. I was like wetting myself.
He's 100%
So we sat in the booth.
Yeah.
And we're sitting there, and like they've got massive bottles of Belvedere vodka and all this stuff. And I said to Minnie, I said, mate, I'm not on former rugby league player money, mate. I'm on a $100 a day per diem here. I'm not going to be able to pay for this. And so I threw him a couple of hundred, and I also had to cover the big media session next day. Bill Belichick and Tom Brady the next day. So I was like, Jesus, I can't. No, that wasn't. So that was a different Super Bowl. Peyton Manning the next day. It was Peyton Manning the next day. I was like, so I'm going to cut out early. So the next day, I went back to the hotel. I was walking back along the main street in San Fran, and here's like the big sign with Ludacris, who was playing there that night. So I took a photo of it and I sent it to Minnie. And Minnie called me, goes, Webby, drama. I said, what do you mean? He said, let's just say when we came to the end of the night, none of us really had enough money to cover the $15,000 bill.
Oh my God. $15,000.
I think that's what it was, yeah. So they were there with the lights on the whole bit. So I dodged the bullet there.
And so what, they like had to...
I think they all had to chip in and try and cover it.
No way. $15,000.
The Min Cat.
The Min Cat. Maybe he should have been Ludacris.
I don't think he wasn't responsible for the whole bill.
Oh, for sure. But it's a big group here.
It was on his name. It was on his card.
No way. 15
Very
grand. Good. It's worth it though. Was this early in his career or later?
No, this is post career. So this is 216.
Oh, okay. So that's why. Yeah. Whereas during his career, he would have been on good coin. They couldn't do it.
Yeah, he was on good coin, but I mean, you couldn't. I don't know. Have you got a lazy 15 in your bank account? You would, because you're worth about. How much is your dynasty?
Mate,
how much is it worth?
Can't let this go.
I can't.
I told you the only value that matters is to my wife and to my community. Sake. And I'm worth. You know what 30? I'm worth? You know what I'm worth to my wife? The world.
$20.
The world.
How much should you be worth?
The world.
30?
To my wife and
mil?
my community. That's all that matters. Give me a break, mate. Come on
Can
now.
I snip you to pay that?
Mate, Webby, thank you so much for coming on, brother. I really appreciate it. And as we said, mate, at the end of the year, be ready for Wayne Bennett's book.
Exactly. Get out there and buy it. Thanks for having me, mate. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.